Hello. So in the last part, we basically spun up a local registry and we created our first Docker container and image. In this part, I want to do a small example of how we can combine a Postgresql container and a Node.js container. They both will be running in a Docker network and both on the same Docker host. So just to reiterate, we have our example project, which basically requires the PostgreSQL modules. Then we have a connection string so that this node application can connect to the database. It runs a simple query on the users table and then prints out all the data and finally closes. And what we want to do for that is first we need to set up a PostgreSQL. So I'll be using this official Postgres image, and we can start by pulling it. So Docker image, no, I think it's just Docker pull Postgres, and I want version number 12 of that. Okay, so while that is pulling, I can start by creating my network. So I do already have 3 networks, but I want to add a new one for this test. So Docker network create test network number 1. And there we go. So then the next step, once we have that image downloaded, would be to actually start the image. So just to make it a little bit easier, I am going to go inside the demo folder in here. And then I can run my docker run command. I usually start by specifying IT if I run it for the first time. So interactive terminal, so I can see the debug if I do something wrong. First, what I want to do is map the port. So PostgreSQL is running on port 5432, and we are mapping the host port 5432 into the container so we can access PostgreSQL by going over localhost. Then I need to set up some image-specific settings. So each image, you usually have environmental variables that you pass on to the image to configure something. In this case, I want to set a PostgreSQL password, and I also want to set a PG data. So that basically specifies that we want to have our folder not in the common var lib PostgreSQL data, but inside a subfolder there. And that makes it easier to then later just map the parent folder over to the host. So we are going to do that by specifying a Postgres password, and it's top secure, because that is what we used in the example project. So user Postgres is the default user of that image, and I'm going to set the password to top secure. Then we specify the path to where PostgreSQL is going to save the actual data. Then I want to attach this container to the test network one that I just created. And of course, I'm going to give the container a name, so it's easier for me to find it later on. And also, other containers in the same network can talk to it by using this name. And then it would be the next step to map over a folder into the container. So when the Docker container restarts, the data in our database doesn't get lost. So I'm using pwd for our current directory that we are in. So that is this whole folder in my home looking projects, Docker Node.js PostgreSQL demo folder. And inside here, we are going to specify a folder called PostgreSQL data. There are multiple options how we could map it. Yeah, let's start with the easiest. So the easiest option would be to have a so-called anonymous storage. So for that, we would just specify the path inside the container. So PostgreSQL and data. That is the folder that we want to map. So in that case, it would create a folder in here, give it a random hash, and then link this folder to this container. You could also give it a named volume. So you give it some name, double points, and then the folder inside the container, and then it would create a folder with that name in here, which makes it easier if you want to copy over the files later on or back them up. And then there is option 3, which we are going to use. We are basically specifying the full path on the host. So we are already in that folder, and then I just need to specify Postgresql data, because that is where I want to have my data in. Okay, so we have all the arguments that we need to run the container. The last bit is to specify the actual container and the version that we want. Okay, so the benefit of the IT flag that we specified here is that we get the immediate output and our database system is ready to accept connections. So for our node application to work, we would also need a table structure first. So there are methods how you can start this up, but I just want to connect to it by a local host. Since I already opened up the port, I don't need to specify the port. I need to specify a user, which is Postgres, and a password, which is top secure. Then if we list our databases and take a look at our script, I need to create a database called API. So after we create the database, we connect to the database and enter our top secure password one more time. And once we are connected, we can then basically create the table that we need. So I'm going to create a table called users. Yeah, so users. And in here we have ID, name, and email. So I'm going to create a table called users. We need an ID column. I will do a serial primary key. So that means that it's doing a ID and it's similar to the auto increment in MySQL. Next step would be to give it a name. Varchar, you usually pick, let's just do 30. And then the last column would be email, and we'll also do another varchar 30. And that is it. So we now have our table. But if we select, there is still no content in the table, so we want to insert something into our users table, and we are going to just provide the values. Okay, so now if we select, we get our entry. So name is foo and email is bar. And now we can basically continue with the next step. So now that we have our container up and running with all the data in there, we can now start spinning up our Node.js container. So similar like this, we are going to start with a docker run -it. I am also going to give it a name. We specify the same network, which is test network number 1. And then we map over a file. So again, if we take a look at our Docker file, what we already did in there is we copy over the index.js into the user src app folder. So you might want to ask, if that's already in the image, why would I want to map that? So the advantage, if we map that, we can edit it on the host system. So on my computer, I can open up my Visual Studio Code and just edit the files on the host system, and all the changes will be instant inside the container image, which makes it nice for local development. Okay, so again, we are going to specify the current folder, and inside here we want the index.js, and we want to map that into the container into the user src/app index.js. And the last bit that we need to specify is our image name. And we are basically using the image from the registry that we created the last video. And that would be it. And what you can see already is the output, because I basically specified the interactive terminal. So our node application will be started. We are mapping over the index.js, and we get the output foo and bar. So what's nice about that is that you can also just edit your index file, and let's say all data now. We just edit the console log line and we run it again. Yeah. We, of course, need to remove it first. Postgresql. Oh, good, good, good. I didn't want to actually remove that container. I wanted to remove that container. Okay, so we remove the demo container and then we can just run it again. And this time it's printing out all data now. So that has the big advantage that we do not need to update our images if we want to make any file changes. We can just use the existing container and just work on a single file, which makes it super convenient for testing. Okay, so let's just shut down that database, clean up my terminals. And I've also provided a Docker compose file in here, which in a nutshell is basically what we've already done. So inside the Docker compose, you basically define your services, which are the two containers that we have. We specify the same names. We specify the image, Postgresql, and we give it the port and the same environmental variables as we did with the docker run command. We're mapping the same folders over there, and everything is pretty much the same. The big advantage of that is when we then run the Docker compose up command, we do not have to create a new network or anything like that. It will automatically do that for us. And that makes it really easy to start and stop stuff. The only thing that I added here is a depends on flag. So that means that the Nodejs PostgreSQL demo container will only be started once the PostgreSQL is operational. And if we run a PostgreSQL app now, we can just take a look, and it's going to create the network, the two things, and it's starting up the PostgreSQL database. And once that is done, the second image will run, and that will basically print our string and our two, our one record that we have in the database. And this also makes it very convenient if you want to develop something. You could just send over somebody a folder, and that folder then contains your demo data, and then you provide a Docker compose, and all they need to do is just run the Docker compose, and that should be it. Okay, thanks for watching. See you in the next part.